College football nerds here talking UCLA and LSU, which is interesting given what happened in week 0. We'll touch on that for sure. But two things in the comments. Number one, give us your score prediction. We always like to mix it up with y'all down there, and we always like to hear how wrong we were. And at least if you back it up with data, that's okay. And number two, we are going to start during the game that you'll be watching during this game, 10 p.m. Eastern, Saturday night, September 4th, our first live show that's ever occurred on game day itself. So that should be really fun. So after your game is over, we'll probably still be chatting. And if not, take a look the next day on Sunday. That live show will be posted for you to watch. They're always fun. We really enjoy the live shows. Have a great time. All right, Josh, I think the first thing that we need to discuss is what happened in that Hawaii game. I think it was like 44-10. It could have been a lot worse had UCLA wanted it to. So for you, how much of this are you looking at and saying, okay, it was Hawaii. They might be historically terrible for Hawaii this year. So I'm reading nothing into this versus, hey, I watched the game and UCLA might be a little better than maybe last season showed or what we've known of UCLA in the past. And it's maybe made me rethink a little bit with it going into this LSU game.
It's always a little column A, a little column B, but the takeaway I had from the UCLA game is they look like the senior-laden team they are. So for those that aren't aware, UCLA returns 20 starters. The entire defense probably will be seniors. A lot of them are super seniors. It's given the super senior-ness of 2021, one of, if not, up there ever with most experienced teams. I mean, just super, super, super senior-laden, post-senior-laden. And it showed. I felt like they were big, they were physical, they executed at a really high level, and they looked like a team that's been playing football for a long time and knew what they were doing. The transfers made a big impact. I thought Charbonnet's a guy we've been really high on since his time in Michigan, and I thought he looked like a really good runner for UCLA. And you'd see like Charbonnet had a run where it was just crazy. Broke like 4 tackles at one point, and 2 or 3 guys trying to wrap him up, just ran through them, kept going, shuck off another guy and was in the end zone. And at some degree, that's the Hawaii players not knowing how to just like grab a guy's leg and fall over. But to another degree, it's a veteran running back that has good pad level. He's being physical. He keeps his legs turning. And it just seemed like everywhere I looked in that game, guys were where they were supposed to be. Guys had a high motor. Guys were executing things at a high level. And it looked like a real football team. It's the first time for me watching UCLA in a long time where they look like a real P5 football team with real P5 athletes. And I thought that was really impressive. The negatives in that game, which I think were pretty obvious, is the passing game wasn't great. I mean, Thompson-Robinson, and we'll probably talk about this later, has been super inconsistent his whole career, and that was on full display. He really couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, frankly, for much of the game. It just didn't matter much because the running game was being so effective. I will say they weren't really running their offense, per se. To a large degree, they were kind of running it when they wanted to score, and then Kelly was dialing things back and was trying to use the passing game to try to push Thompson-Robinson a little bit and try to work on some things when they needed to and try to establish a real downfield passing game. Never really quite worked, but they were trying at it. But my real takeaway from UCLA is that looks like a really solid team. And whatever you think of their talent level or anything else or how good they were or were not last year, I do think that's a team that is going to play at a high level and be competitive in most every game, if not every game all year, just because it's rare to have teams with that level of experience, that level of seniority, and it almost always shows up on the football field when you get it.
Yeah, and it's a good point because we always use 2017 Georgia as a benchmark for this kind of thing, where you've had teams, or you have a team who doesn't do well for a number of years in a row, or they do less than expected, and that's where Georgia was. So you have guys who, if they were on a team that was going 10-2, 11-1, playing on the biggest stage in these ranked matchups, the guys that are doing well would have more exposure and would have already gone pro. So instead what you have is a team that's artificially senior laden with artificially good leadership, where you might have 3 or 4 of these really impact players already going to the NFL, and you're backfilling with less talented players. So that really is kind of the situation that we see with UCLA as well. Vegas agrees with you. Right now, it's a 4-point spread, and I don't know that Vegas is crazy, although I think they're also playing on a lot of unknown. There's a lot of unknown for UCLA, given that last year was kind of a crapshoot, especially for the Pac-12, because we didn't know who was playing, who was doing what, when they were playing, how many games they were going to get, anything like that. And then LSU was all over the place. They had the Florida game, which was really interesting. They had the game at the end of the year, putting up a boatload of points on Ole Miss, although everybody did that. They got in a bunch of shootouts. The defense was a little weird. So how much of this line is really that Vegas doesn't know what to make of LSU at this point?
It's probably a lot of it, right? There's a lot of unknowns in this game. We've talked about this several times. I'm going to repeat it because it's a point I want to make at the beginning of the year. I don't think we really can take almost anything away from 2020 results for the Pac-12 because of how they were restricted in starting the season. I think a lot of the teams never really were ready to go. Half the players didn't know they were ever going to play, and the mindset just wasn't really there. And you got an LSU team that was super up and down in 2020. They came out of the gate defensively were just a total mess. I think even any LSU fan is going to admit that. Kind of got their act together a little bit. Got that big win against Florida late in the year. And then won a shootout against Ole Miss that on one hand looked really explosive offensively, and on the other hand, you gave up 48 points. So I'm not sure how you take any of it. And you mix in the super senior aspect, the fact that like UCLA has a lot of transfers. You got a transfer linebacker Mike Jones at LSU, transfer linebacker Ali Cahoe, former 5-star at Alabama, is now probably going to start for UCLA in this game. Just all over the board, two teams that no one quite knows what they're going to look like. UCLA lost a lot of games by one score. They were a field goal worse than Oregon, who won the Pac-12 last year. So they were that close to being the Pac-12 champion. And then you got an LSU team that lost to Mississippi State, who was not a good team, beat Florida, who was a very good team, and no one knows where they were at. So I think the variability potential for this game is extremely high. There's really no outcome that would surprise me. And I think the Vegas spread, I don't think it necessarily means this will be a close game. I think it just means that they really feel like this game could go either way. They set it a little bit in LSU's favor, but just the fact that it's -4 on average doesn't mean they think this game will end up within a score. In fact, I'm kind of curious if you agree with this. In many ways, it would not surprise me, however the game turns out for either team, if this ends up being a substantial victory. Like a 2-touchdown win for either team wouldn't shock me.
Wouldn't shock me at all. And this is a tough game to predict. We just did Ohio State, Minnesota, where both of us predicted Ohio State covers a 2-touchdown spread. We feel a little bit better about really both of those teams in terms of what we know and what we don't know. The question marks around UCLA and LSU, in my opinion, the fact that we're struggling with this is actually a good sign for both of these teams because neither of them had great years last year. And it's giving them the benefit of the doubt because, one, we did see what we saw against Hawaii, and you can't, eye test matters. Some of that is a big deal. But two, just in our gut, we know that LSU has a lot of talent. And we're almost willing in some ways to give them a mulligan for last year. The only game that really bothered me was the Auburn game because catching that Mississippi State game in week 1 before everybody knew that they didn't know how to play against the zone. Like if LSU plays them in week 4, they probably beat them. That game against Missouri was the same kind of thing. So I don't kill LSU for a lot of what we saw last year. I do have some concerns, and I have yes, they returned 9 starters on defense. I think it's 9. But you always say, if you return a lot of starters on a team that was bad, that's not really good necessarily. But in this weird way, they return a ton of just 5- and 4-star talent that it's hard to ignore, right? So the thing for me, and I want you to touch on this, I actually had LSU penciled in as a top 10 team before Brennan got hurt, which for a lot of people might be crazy, but I was really high on Brennan. I have a lot of question marks now around LSU's quarterback situation. That's not to say that it's going to be bad. It's just it's moved now into an unknown.
I'd agree with that. I mean, Max Johnson showed flashes of a guy that could be, a future franchise quarterback, but we are numbers driven, and we look at statistics for given players and trying to figure out how successful they're going to be. And one of my big problems when you look at Max Johnson's stats is they really weren't very good. I mean, 7.2 yards per attempt against Auburn. In relief, sounds good, but they lost that game by 37 points, and he came in late. The next few games where he played more snaps, 5 yards per attempt against Texas A&M, 6.5 against Alabama, 6.6 against Florida. Even though they won that game, they did it with 239 yards passing. There were a lot of miscues on the Florida side of the ball that gave it to him. And he had one good game. 8.5 yards per attempt is actually not that crazy in current era, but 400 yards passing against Ole Miss. But Ole Miss's defense was atrocious. So it's hard to peg what they're going to get. Now, that was him as a true freshman. I think he's probably going to be a much better quarterback this year. But it's hard for me to say he won that job because he's good, because he won it by default. Finley transferred, Brennan got injured, and now you have to hope Max Johnson's the guy, because regardless of whether or not he's a good quarterback, he's going to be your starter. And I know you've got a 5-star guy, Nussmeier, there's a lot of hype about him. He's not going to be ready out of the gate to play UCLA. I mean, that's not really a factor at this point. So LSU has a ton of question marks. I think the Gilbert transfer is really impactful. I think Gilbert was easily one of the top upcoming talents in the SEC. And schematically, he really strained a lot of teams last year because you had a tight end that would easily beat a linebacker in coverage. That was a real problem for a lot of defenses. LSU is going to be a lot more traditional in how they approach games, and teams are going to be a lot more traditional in how they're able to defend them. I do think Boutte gives them a really good receiver. I think they've got a lot of potential talent in guys like Jenkins or Palmer or Kirkland or who have you, but it's not all necessarily there yet. And so the key pieces that make this ship run, the skill position talent that they normally relied on, the quarterback play isn't clearly there. And maybe it shows up because the recruiting rankings certainly were there, but the production isn't clearly there. And on the defensive side of the ball, you've got a lot of awesome talent, but you had a lot of really bad production. Trying to figure out where in the world that lands LSU as a team is just, you can hear it in my voice probably. It is mind-bogglingly hard for me to actually project what LSU is going to look like this season.
And that's not good or bad. It's just a question mark. It's right now it's an incomplete, and so LSU fans are going to want to get at us in the comments and say, we're good at this and we're going to do this and we're going to prove you wrong. You're not proving us wrong because we're not saying you're going to be bad. We don't know. We need to see a little bit of play. So going from the unknown to a completely hypothetical, which I know you love. We like to do this discussion a little bit because quarterbacks are so important. We do this discussion in some games. We've seen DTR be up and down. Neither one of us are super high on him as a passer, though he's an elite athlete and can really strain a defense running the ball. Of these two teams, if you had to guess, let's say Saturday, one of them has a not-so-great performance from their quarterback. Let's say both of them do. Which team, in your opinion, is better equipped to absorb that setback of not having a great performance from their quarterback?
I have to think that answer is going to be UCLA. UCLA has a really productive veteran offensive line. They've got a good set of running backs. They have a running quarterback that can produce even if he's not able to throw the ball successfully. And in Kelly's system, they don't really need to throw the ball to move it. And they really don't. They're built to be able to do that. LSU, I feel like if they're not able to throw it, they could have some issues. They don't have a true offensive or left tackle, a true offensive tackle to a certain degree, but especially left tackle on the roster now that Rosenthal's gone. And I do think the backs are good. I mean, Emory hasn't quite ever gotten to the point he's supposed to be, but Davis Price is still a good back. But I don't know that they have an edge, especially given, again, how senior laden UCLA is. And we talk about the LSU secondary. So here's sort of a fun stat for you. In terms of pass defenses last year, okay? 127 teams played college football. 127 in 2020. In pass defense, this was the 127th pass defense in LSU and the 114th ranked pass defense in UCLA. Two of the worst 15 pass defenses in the country on both sides of the ball. So if there's a place to be exploited on paper, it's pass defense. But in terms of rush defense, one of these was a lot better than the other. UCLA was actually 30th in the country in rush defense. They gave up about 135 yards per game. LSU was 67th, 170 yards per game. And I think the thing to sort of keep in mind is even when LSU was, sort of on the better side of the ball, they're still giving up 4.88 yards per carry. They were between Arkansas and South Carolina, and Arkansas's Achilles heel really was run defense last year. They could be run on, and if there's one side of the ball where I question the improvement, it's probably run defense, frankly, for LSU. The secondary's got, with Ricks and Stingley, an All-American duo of corners. It's baffling that they were as bad as they were. I think it really comes down to the fact that they've got two awesome corners, and then you've got some serious holes when you talk about Flott or Ward or the other guys that were playing in the secondary, and that may show up again. But then a defensive line, Gay is a good pass rusher, maybe a little undersized. Anthony can be a good pass rusher. Logan, Farrell, those guys throughout their career have been serviceable starters and not a whole lot more. And you've got a lot of turnover in the linebacker position. No one knows how that's going to turn out, especially given how many transfers are going to play. But I think it's telling, as much as Orgeron's talked about, like Mason Smith starting as a true freshman, I don't think you normally want to rely on a true freshman plug on the nose tackle position if you want to be a top 10 team. I think LSU's run defense is probably at best case going to be merely good. I have a hard time believing it's going to be elite. Whereas UCLA was a really productive run defense, and the fact that they just returned all of those guys means they're almost certainly going to be probably even better. And given the fact that UCLA has a veteran offensive line to pair with some running backs that are really veteran players and a running quarterback, means I think they can win without having to throw it. So both these teams, summing it up, really vulnerable through the air last year. Probably both these teams are really boom or bust. They're going to be really good at times. UCLA is really aggressive. LSU has some really good corners, but they also have some really big holes. So there's opportunities for big plays in the passing game. But if those aren't coming, I think UCLA is a little better prepared to be able to just line up the ball and run it every play, and then maybe take an RPO shot on an isolation coverage. I think LSU would probably struggle a little more with that strategy.
I'll give you a little pushback there because I wonder what UCLA's rushing defense looks like if they played LSU's schedule. That's the only thing that I'll note there. All right, prediction time. I cannot imagine a harder game to pick because I could see either team blowing the other out. I can see it being a really close game. I hate picking games like this, but it was an interesting one, so we needed to talk about it. I'm going to go UCLA 27, LSU 24. I'm really, it's a shot in the dark, and I know LSU fans are probably going to vow to never watch our channel again because I'm picking them to lose, and I've been wrong before on them. When I pick them to lose, I'm wrong. When I pick them to win, I'm wrong. So, whatever. But give me yours on this one.
I'm going to pick UCLA 37-34. Now, I feel like I've been wrong more often than I've been right with LSU in recent years. I don't know I think we're about 50%, honestly, but when we're wrong, we've been so wrong a lot of times. And frankly, it's been that LSU has been super inconsistent. And given what we talked about, like Dorian Thompson-Robinson at UCLA, okay, if you look at his passing statistics from last season, he had a 300-yard passing game against Colorado, 200-yard passing game against California, 200-yard passing game against Arizona State, 364 yards against Southern Cal, 65 yards against Stanford. I mean, just up, down, 112 passing rating, 190 passer rating, back-to-back weeks. I think if these teams played each other 10 times, you would get 3 close games and 3 blowouts on either side. I really do feel that way. And then I don't know what the 10th game is. It just, there is so much volatility at play here. And the one thing I'm saying is I think the seniority level at UCLA, the fact that LSU has a tremendous amount of turnover in assistant coaches and coordinators, I think they're not going to have everything quite settled yet. It's going to play out in UCLA's favor early, especially with a quarterback injury, lose your left tackle. There's a lot of stuff, lose your star tight end. A lot of stuff that's kind of messed up for LSU on the offensive side of the ball. But I just have a weird feeling this game is going to be higher scoring than people expect. Given as many players returning, these are defenses that didn't do great last year. And there are a lot of explosive athletes. Like, we didn't talk enough about Boutte. I think his ceiling is incredibly high at LSU, and he's going to make some seriously impressive plays in this game. I think it's going to be fairly high scoring. But, man alive, this one, I thought we wanted to do it because UCLA is the one team we've seen. But I think Daniel was right when he's like, I'm not even sure we're going to be able to pick it because it's just maddening. And I will say, it wouldn't shock me if middle of the year that we're still just as confused with these two teams and it's still just as hard to pick. I feel like they're going to be really volatile all season long.
Yeah, and winding this thing down, like I think that if people look at these and really think about, what we do on this show is we really just try to give a candid, honest look at the game. And for us, given our footprint, in the SEC region, it would be better for this channel to pick at LSU. Both of us pick LSU in a close game or whatever 10 out of 10 times because we don't get a lot of viewership from UCLA fans or even on the West Coast. So this kind of shows the fact, and we didn't discuss our picks before we started rolling on this. This shows, again, that at least I hope y'all can appreciate that, like, we're trying to give an honest look at this game. I hope LSU fans can appreciate that and that it's really more about the question marks than anything else. All right, y'all, remember two things. Give us your score. You can tell us why we're wrong. We're happy to hear it. And then when this game wraps up, we might still be talking on our live show, 10 p.m. Eastern. And for those of y'all that aren't maybe going to watch this game, you can talk with us there. 10 p.m. Eastern on September 4th, we will be live talking college football and all the action of the day. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.